Pleasant good evening, Trinidad and Tobago, and welcome to our live discussion on TTT with respect to Trinidad and Tobago's disaster relief support to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I am Lieutenant Commander Kirk Jean-Baptiste, your moderator this afternoon, and joining me in studio is Major General Rodney Smart, the Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. Joining us virtually, we have a star-studded panel, Dr. Uracilla Joseph of the University of the West Indies Seismic Research Center, the Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of Energy, the Vice Chief of Defense Staff, Brigadier General Dexter Francis, representing the Defense Force, Major General Rodney Smart, the Chief Executive Officer for the ODPM, Mr. Jerry Davis, the Senior Disaster Management Coordinator, Ministry of Local Government, and Mr. Alan Stewart, the CEO of TEMA. Allow me to give you a little background as to what brought us here today. So in June last year, the Minister of National Security agreed with a proposal from the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management and obtained the Cabinet's approval for the establishment of a multi-sectoral committee. This committee, it was envisaged, would take on an all-society approach to disaster risk reduction management, and thus the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Committee was formed. The overarching goal of the committee is to strengthen disaster prevention and preparedness in Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, improve the country's readiness and resilience to catastrophic events. At this time, the committee comprises of 35 representatives from various ministries and divisions, and it can be co-opted with other individual organizations and in order to assist in its work. In addition to the committee's principal mandate, it is responsible for the management of the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month. The month of May was selected as it coincides with the normal start of the rainy season, which comes just before the commencement of the Atlantic hurricane season. This season runs from June the 1st to November 30th annually. To ensure a holistic approach is taken to disaster prevention and preparedness during May, the committee created 4 subcommittees. Each subcommittee aims to build knowledge, awareness, and capacity among the different sectors of society. In each week of May, special emphasis is placed on the 4 segments of society: the individual and family, civil society organizations, communities, and the public and private sectors, international bodies and partner communities within CARICOM's southern sub-region. So let's get started with our discussions. The viewing public and media, we will take questions at the end of the entire discourse. So I now turn you over to Dr. Uracilla Joseph from the University of the West Indies Seismic Research Center.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present today on the work that the UWI Seismic Research Center has been doing in response to the eruption of La Soufrière in St. Vincent. So I will now share my, I'd like to share my screen if possible. I'm waiting on the host to allow me to share my screen. So while that is being organized, as most people are aware, the work of the Seismic Research Center involves providing the source of information for earthquakes and volcanoes in the English-speaking Caribbean, with the largest geophysical network of over 60 stations in the region. We also provide governments with maps and information on geological hazards. We support disaster management agencies with public education efforts, and we conduct research on these geological processes. Let me try again to share screen. Nope, not possible. So I could continue, but I know the bulk of the response, it would be beneficial to show the presentation. So once they've sorted out the screen sharing, I guess they will let me know. I could continue by saying that most of the islands that we monitor, from St. Kitts and Nevis all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago, have seen seismic activity because we sit in a subduction zone setting. But the volcanic islands, of which we have St. Kitts, Nevis, Montserrat, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Grenada, they all have at least one volcanic center. However, Dominica has 9, and each of these islands have had volcano seismic crisis in the past, and some of them multiple crisis events. The St. Vincent episode started in late December. On the 27th of December, we saw a new dome being created, what we call a satellite dome. This was formed of the west-southwest sector of the 1979 dome that existed in the crater, and this began to grow as an effusive eruption. Effusive means that it was a very slow oozing of the magma in the summit and not an explosive event. Let me try to share my screen once more. Okay, so I am still unable to share my screen. So this dome continued growing until the eruption switched from effusive to explosive on the 9th of April. But in response to the extrusive eruption in late December, what happened is the SRC had to respond. As most people know, it was during the pandemic. So the first priority was to strengthen the monitoring network and to develop hazard assessments for what was happening. This involved us moving a team off island to St. Vincent, where we were then able to work on strengthening of the network. We worked closely with the National Disaster Coordinator, NEMO, on the island of St. Vincent to do this. And we began collecting other essential scientific information, such as conducting fieldwork, rock and gas sampling. We provided regular advisories and briefings to a large body of decision makers, and we responded to media inquiries, developed a social media program to provide public awareness and reporting on the ongoing activity, and we participated in public and virtual town hall meetings in St. Vincent. The next considerations with respect to the ongoing eruption was having to deal with the ongoing COVID pandemic. And this meant quarantine periods, travel restrictions, ongoing testing of staff, and preparing a staff roster. There was also a lack of funding for additional monitoring equipment. This included seismic, ground deformation, and visual and thermal monitoring, as well as gas monitoring equipment. We had an increased physical risk to staff, especially as the dome started to get bigger. And we had limited human resources in terms of only a few members of staff capable of doing the work on island. And this had to be sourced from both the team on island in Trinidad at SRC and our Montserrat-based staff. We had to develop new areas of expertise and tools, such as risk assessment and to report the scientific data, and education and awareness tools. We also required helicopter support to deploy essential equipment on the crater of the volcano. and to move field staff. And there was the possibility of continued rapid changes in the volcanic activity, as well for planning for an unknown length of the eruption. There was also the possibility of concurrent volcanic or seismic unrest in other islands during the period in which we were responding to the St. Vincent eruption. So the expansion of the network took place with respect to additional seismic GPS equipment, as well as we were able to use satellite data to look at changes in ground deformation. We collected gas using multi-gas and UV spectrometers. We monitored changes in the dome volume as well as the growth rate, and we also had remote cameras viewing the crater and the volcano structure itself. However, after 1 second, I'm gonna try and share my screen again. Nope. Okay. All right. So with respect to the additional monitoring, when the volcano began exploding on the 9th of April, it meant that some of the equipment was destroyed, and so that has been lost. However, we still maintain monitoring capability. After that, since the 9th of April to the 22nd of April, there's been 32 explosions associated with the La Soufrière volcanic eruption. And after the initial phase of the ground deformation, in terms of, we saw the deflation of the dome, of the volcanic edifice itself, after the early stages, the 9th and 10th of April. We saw there is a continued decrease in the sulfur dioxide plume flux concentrations being emitted from the volcano, and the impacts would have been widely seen in terms of the ash covering the entire island of St. Vincent in varying amounts, being heaviest to the north, but with moderate to light ash fall more to the south. However, based on the wind directions in the upper atmosphere, in the early phases of the explosive eruption, a lot of ash was, as most people knew, was also carried to Barbados, and some to lighter ash fall to nearby islands of St. Lucia and even as far as Montserrat. We continue to see the impacts of the eruption in the form of pyroclastic density current that occurred in the period of the explosive phase, and currently lahars or mud flows are still being observed in during period of heavy rainfall around the flanks of the volcano. We continue to look at management based on the volcanic alert level table and communicate changes. The volcano is currently in an orange alert, and this means that activity is still highly elevated, and there are certain restrictions in terms of access to the red zone that are enforced by the civil authorities on St. Vincent. Part of the management for this eruption actually began long before. In 2018, one of the things that seismic does is that we look for projects that can complement the work of the center, and these are externally funded. And there was a project that we call Volcano Ready Communities, and this was funded by a CDB grant. And this provided enhanced community-specific emergency response procedures to be developed in 12 communities around the volcano. And this, I would say, was one of the most important tools in terms of strengthening the capacity for residents to prepare and respond to emergencies when the volcano actually did become explosive. And there was this buy-in and the capacity building in advance of the eruption that allowed these communities to be able to respond quickly when the evacuation order was given by the authorities in St. Vincent. So in terms of the prognosis. We continue to monitor. The volcano is still in a state of unrest. We still see, as I mentioned before, the risk of lahars with periods of heavy rainfall. And this is something that could continue for months ahead. It's currently still seen in Montserrat, for instance. Seismic activity does remain low. However, we are still seeing what we call volcanic earthquakes associated with the volcano. So in essence, this is a summary of what we've done and what is the current state of the eruption in St. Vincent. Thank you.
We want to thank you, Dr. Joseph. That was Dr. Joseph from the University of the West Indies Seismic Research Center. We apologize for the technical glitches that may have occurred during your present, but you still provided us with some noteworthy accounts. I now want to hand you over to the Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of Energy, who has kindly consented to address us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to the esteemed panel and some familiar faces. To the CEO of ODPM, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, of course to our moderator, Lieutenant Commander Kirk Shaw-Baptiste, to Mr. Alan Stewart from TEMA, to Jerry David at the Ministry of Local Government and Rural Development, Brigadier General Dexter Francis, and to Dr. Joseph, who's just given us a great presentation and a technical presentation on what happened recently over in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the La Soufrière volcano. I guess I am here this afternoon really in my former capacity of Minister of National Security. I still hold Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister. And during that period of time, just to give you a quick insight, I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to sit in the hot seat a few times along the history. And that's how I know some of these familiar faces. I see Alan smiling. We have had in Trinidad and Tobago, what I'd like to say to this panel here today is you all are doing a great job. And Major General Retired Rodney Smart, you've brought a new breath of air to the ODPM as you all continue to drive what needs to be done. And a lot of how we deal with disasters, as you all would have heard me say before, is the preparation stage. So out of Trinidad and Tobago, we've had to deal with some natural disasters in the past few years in Trinidad, but also fortunately, we've been able to provide our services and our assistance throughout the CARICOM. We provided it to Dominica not so long ago. I led a contingent of 100 boots on the ground from the TTDF up to the Bahamas, also not so long ago. And the most recent regional support that we provided is in St. Vincent and the Grenadines with La Soufrière, as you heard Dr. Joseph remind us, in early April when there were certain explosions. I'd like to thank the ODPM for the leading role that it played during that period of time, rose to the occasion, did what needed to be done in terms of the coordination of our various resources for us to then be able to get these resources to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Brigadier General Francis at the time was our acting CDS. As usual, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force rose to the occasion. I mean, Jerry David and Alan, we have been through quite a few natural disasters in Trinidad and Tobago, right? Within recent years, we've dealt with some unprecedented flooding. I remember flying across to Tobago on the helicopter to meet with you all a couple of years ago when we had some disastrous flooding. I mean, Jerry has been there throughout, whether we're dealing with hurricane or tropical storms and the flooding. We also had an earthquake not so long ago in 2018. What I'd like to say is you just have to keep up the good work. And as I've said before, in my view, there are two critical components when we're dealing with natural disasters. One is the preparations we do in advance, and two is the communication, both in advance, but also the calm communication that needs to take place throughout whatever is the disaster. And in our preparations before, as you would have heard me say, it's critical to know where our various assets are, what asset base we have, so we can deploy to have constant communications going on internally in our various teams. I am quite proud that not so long ago, maybe a year ago, as you would have heard the moderator say at the start, recognizing the important role of ODPM and our various partners, TIMA, Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the TTDF, and all of the other various bodies you would have heard the moderator talk about. We took a decision that we needed to have proper coordination, have everybody on the same page, various subcommittees, to be able to deal with whatever disasters we're called upon to deal with, including to assist in the region. Dr. Joseph, I'd like to personally thank your team at the UV Seismic Department. We know how important the work you're doing for the rest of the region is, and beforehand, your personal thanks is appreciated. It's nice to now put a face to the name when we're dealing with the exemptions, because we continue to remain in a pandemic, and I think that message can't be lost today. So for what happened, for starting with our UV Seismic team, going out to St. Vincent and Grenadines, work that you all did and came back safely, still have persons on the ground, but then to send a contingent of the TTDF officers across by Coast Guard vessel, and also let me not forget my colleagues, the Minister of Works and Transport, for his team helping us with the Galleon's passage, but then also Minister Gopi Schoon as the Minister of Trade and Industry, rallying along with Major General Smart and ODPM to just gather all of the various donations for us to help our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It was yet again another proud moment. We here in Trinidad and Tobago stand ready. I think we've shown, in particular over the last few years, that we're very capable of coordinating any response that needs to happen, not only locally and domestically in Trinidad and Tobago, but also to help our brothers and sisters throughout the rest of the CARICOM region, as far north as the Bahamas not so long ago. And I mean, I was remembering when I first dealt with Alan, and it was a trip to Washington, D.C. I'm not sure if he remembers it, when we went out there to look at how they were dealing with disaster response in the United States. And, you know, just to see the various persons who are part of this come together, and the great work you all are doing. You can always count on Jerry David briefing us way beforehand and warning us of what is taking place from all different perspectives. Keep up the teamwork. Continue to fly our flag high and strong from our seismic department, ODPM, Brigadier General Francis, the TTDF always stands by. I mean, we've been managing a lot since the pandemic started in January of last year. Despite whatever criticism there may be, the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force has been a critical pillar in all that goes on, and I can always have counted on you all to do what needs to be done, from our Coast Guard, our boots on the ground in the regiment, the defense, our Air Guard, and the use of the C-26. One of the last things I was able to do before moving across to energy, along with ODPM, Major General Smart, is we gathered a whole set of items that Barbados had asked for Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and our Air Guard dutifully helped us, loaded up a C-26, took it across. Please keep up that good work. The coordination is important. You all are on the right track. You continue to fly our flag high in CARICOM throughout the region. We are also recognized in the Western Hemisphere as being one of the pillars of critical response. We are fortunate in that we have more resources than some others may, but we always make whatever our limited resources are work as well and stretch them as far as we can. I will continue to be a proud Trinidadian, a proud citizen of this Twin Island state, and you all will always have my support no matter what role I'm playing. And just keep it up, because it is critical, especially in times of disaster. And I've worked with all of you all, not so much with you, Dr. Joseph. I haven't been on the brink of the volcanoes, etc. as yet, but keeping calm in times of crisis is what provides the necessary leadership. And every single one of you all in here have continued to do that. And that's a great credit to you all. And also, let's never forget to thank the citizens and the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago who have provided each and every one of you all with the necessary training over your professional lives and the opportunities to rise to the many occasions that you have. Just keep it up. And I am happy to have been asked to participate here today to really talk about how we coordinated the response. I think it's all there. It's all written in the annals of history and annals of history, what Trinidad and Tobago did to come forward to help St. Vincent and the Grenadines recently, how quickly we were able to mobilize ODPM did a great job. TTDF did a great job. We had the seismic department there. So I don't want to take up too much more time. I'll be here to address a few questions at the end. And back over to you, Mr. Moderator, Lieutenant Commander Kirk Jean-Baptiste. Thank you all very much for the opportunity just to share a few thoughts, a few experiences, and a few words on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of Energy, the then Minister of National Security during that time of disaster. I now want to turn you over to the Vice Chief of Defense Staff, Brigadier General Dexter Francis, representing the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force this afternoon. Brigadier Francis, sir.
Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of Energy, Major General Rodney Smart, CEO of the ODPM, Dr. Joseph, UE Seismic, Salon Stewart, TIMA, Mr. Jerry David, Regional Corporation, distinguished panelists, Mr. Moderator, Lieutenant Commander Jean-Baptiste, members of the viewing and listening public, good afternoon. Please allow me, on behalf of Air Vice Marshal Darrell Daniel, the Chief of Defense Staff, and the officers, men and women of the Defense Force, to begin first by thanking the organizers of the National Disaster Preparedness Month for extending an invitation to the Defense Force to participate in such an important discourse as we prepare to enter the 2021 hurricane season. This afternoon, it is my distinct pleasure to share with you some insights into the recent Defense Force deployment to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. On the morning of Tuesday, 13th April 2021, responding to the instructions of the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the Defense Force deployed a joint task force comprising a contingent of 50 soldiers, sailors, airmen, and reservists to St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the wake of the eruption of the La Soufrière volcano. The mission of this joint task force was to convey relief supplies that were donated by the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago to the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and to conduct humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations in support of the local designated authorities in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for a period of 14 days in the first instance. Following the end of the mission period, the Joint Task Force redeployed to Trinidad and Tobago on the 1st of May 2021. With regard to political and legal considerations, the legislative support for the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force overseas deployment is in accordance with Section 5 of the Defense Act, Chapter 1401, and whilst on operations within CARICOM, the Treaty on Security Assistance among CARICOM states. This treaty was enacted in domestic legislation as the Security Assistance CARICOM Act, Chapter 1405, and specific to humanitarian and disaster relief operations, the objectives as provided in Article 3 of the Act facilitate the efficient and timely response to and management of natural and man-made disasters. Legal Notice Number 99, dated 13th April 2021, provided the presidential authority in accordance with Section 5 of the Defense Act for the deployment of the Defense Force Joint Task Force to participate in disaster relief operations in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In this regard, the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, on the request from the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as a signatory to the treaty and as host state for assistance, were able to submit the requisite diplomatic clearance for the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force ships to enter the jurisdiction of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, respecting the sovereignty, rights, and protections of the host state, the importation of vehicles, arms, and ammunition into St. Vincent and the Grenadines for use by Defense Force personnel, and the seconding of Defense Force deployed personnel to provide assistance to the Commissioner of Police of the Royal St. Vincent and the Grenadines Police Service. With agreement for assistance cleared at the political level, the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Stuart Young at the time, placed the Defense Force on standby for deployment. It should be noted that the time frame for the deployment of the Defense Force was within 96 hours of being given notice to move. With regard to preparation and planning, the military decision-making processes occur at Defense Force headquarters and involved human resource, which is bringing the task force together. A task force of this nature would normally be structured with a task force commander and second in command with senior enlisted advisor, a reconnaissance, surveillance, and logistics team, and members of the main body of the task force, both land and maritime components. It also involved administration, which saw the headquarters and exchanging correspondence between the National Ministry of National Security and the headquarters of itself, between the Defense Force headquarters and our CARICOM Disaster Emergency Management Authority, CDEMA, and between the Defense Force headquarters and the Regional Security System headquarters. Intelligence, understanding what was going on the ground in St. Vincent and the Grenadines through official intelligence sources, through open sources, including social and mainstream media. It also involved operations, generating orders and instructions that would define the intent of the political level, what the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago wanted to achieve politically by the Joint Task Force deployment, the intent of the Chief of Defense Staff, what the Chief of Defense Staff wanted to achieve operationally by the Joint Task Force, the mission of the task force, what specifically would be the work that they will conduct while in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the concept of operations, how this mission will be conducted and accomplished, the specified tasks to formations of the Defense Force, and the specific tasks of the Joint Task Force itself, and the determination of resources available for deployment. Resources to include arms and ammunition, decisions on vehicles to be taken, what vessels to be used, personal protective equipment, medical, on the point of medical, in keeping with the guidelines provided in the CDEMA COVID-19 deployment protocol dated July 28, 2020, all task force personnel were administered a PCR test prior to deployment in order to satisfy the health protocols in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A Defense Force medical doctor was part of the task force contingent, along with medics and medical equipment as per standard operating procedures in relation to Defense Force deployments. With regard to communication needed to be established between the Defense Force headquarters here in Trinidad and our task force in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, between the task force ship and the task force shore element in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and between the task force ship and its Coast Guard headquarters back here in Trinidad and Tobago. In considering logistics, the political guidance given to the acting Chief of Defense Staff at the time was that this Defense Force Joint Task Force will be self-sufficient. Consequently, planning of logistics was geared towards ensuring that the Joint Task Force would not be a burden on the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Additionally, given the unique nature of the situation in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, special consideration had to be given to movement and transport of relief items, movement and transport of the task force personnel and equipment for reception, staging, and onward movement and integration of the task force, and also for sustainment of the task force. With regard to movement and transport of relief items to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, relief items were coordinated by the ODPM and were moved to the port of Port of Spain, from the port of Port of Spain to the port of Kingston via the MV Galleons Passage on the 13th and also on the 29th of April 2021. The role of the Defense Force on both occasions was to assist the ODPM by coordinating the reception, the accounting, the palletizing, the staging, and the loading of relief items delivered at the port of Port of Spain. Specific actions performed by the Defense Force in connection with this role included a visit by the head of the Defense Force Sustainment Branch to the port of Port of Spain on the 12th of April 2021 to assess arrangements for the sending of relief items to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This reconnaissance enabled the Defense Force to gain valuable insights into and respond to immediate requirements for additional manpower and equipment, for example, forklifts at the port of Port of Spain. The establishment of contacts with key state agencies, including the National Infrastructure Development Company Limited, NIDCO, Port Authority, and the Ministry of Public Utilities, thereby ensuring the availability of mission-critical resources to the Defense Force, namely access to the wharf or the port facilities, access to the Galleons Passage, and access to water trucks that we would deliver to St. Vincent in order to provide delivery of water supplies for the population. With regard to movement and transport of the task force personnel and equipment, members of the task force, other than the crew of Coast Guard vessel CG-24, along with equipment, utility vehicles, moved to St. Vincent and the Grenadines via the MV Galleons Passage. Most of the equipment provided to the task force was moved to St. Vincent and the Grenadines via one of the fast crew supply vessels, which was TTS Brighton, or CG-24, from the Coast Guard, which also arrived in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on the 13th of April, 2021. With regard to the sustainment of the task force in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, deployment to the task force was sustained for a total period of 19 days, from the 13th of April, when they arrived, to the 1st of May, when they departed St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The role of the Defense Force Sustainment Branch for this deployment was to ensure the adequate availability of all classifications of supplies necessary for the task force to self-sustain over this period in keeping with the government's guidance. Specific tasks performed by the Sustainment Branch in connection with this role included defining and refining the sustainment concept of support, as well as determining stock levels for items provided to this task force, coordinating the acquisition of required items from the corporate and non-governmental sponsors, arranging for the availability of funds to facilitate the procurement of items and services required for the operation, facilitating the procurement of items and services required by the task force, coordinating the acquisition of required items and services from the organic logistics resources of respective formations of the Defense Force, compiling the general inventory of items provided to the task force for deployment, coordinating the customs clearance of weapons and ammunition issued to the task force, coordinating the delivery, receipt, packaging, staging, distribution, and accountability of required items acquired by the Sustainment Branch, coordinating the acquisition of required items and services from commercial services. This, in a nutshell, is how the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force managed its deployment to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Tomorrow, my colleague, Squadron Leader Marlon Dorridge, who headed the task force, would come onto this program and explain further how the task force accomplished its mission in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So I will end at this point, and I hope that the foregoing would have clarified for the members of the public the many activities that make up the complexity of a defense force deployment in support of our regional brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Chief of Defense Staff, Brigadier General Dexter Francis, for that detailed and precise account of the Defense Force's actions from information to deployment for the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Right? Well said, well done. We've received several comments thanking us for this program we've put together today, and people seem to be pleased and enjoying what we are doing. So I'm now going to turn you over to the Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, Major General Rodney Smart. Sir.
The Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, my fellow panelists, the members of the viewing and listening public, good afternoon all. Today it gives me great pleasure to speak with you on the ODPM's coordination of Trinidad and Tobago's disaster relief support to St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the aftermath of the La Soufrière volcano eruption. Slide, please.
Quickly evacuate. You may not have the time to grab the essentials. Be sure to have your grab-and-go bag in easily accessible locations.
So this is what I am speaking to today. And before going further, I also am carrying a double hat, and that is as chairman of the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Committee. And I want to say thank you to all the participants who agreed to come on set today and share with the Trinidad and Tobago public this wonderful and successful story that the committee felt it should be told, how Trinidad and Tobago was able to do this in such record time. My presentation format, slide please. Next slide. This is what I'll be speaking about today. The situational awareness that the ODPM had at the time or had to create, the planning we went through, the plan we devised, the order that would have come from the Minister of National Security, the operation itself, which was done in 4 phases. Phase 1, information management. 2, establishment of collection centers. 3, land movement of relief items to centralized hubs. And phase 4, sea movement to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And finally, the termination of the operation. Situational awareness. Slide, please. Today, I'm going to share with you the ODPM's perspective, some of the key elements at the strategic level of this fantastic story, and which enable us to mobilize as quickly as we did. When the volcano erupted explosively on Friday, the 9th of April, there were no surprises to the ODPM, as the office had been intimately involved in planning for this eventuality. Through our close relationships with UE Seismic, the National Emergency Organization in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the CDIMA-CU, CDIMA being the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CU the coordinating unit, as well as information gained from social media, we were being kept abreast of the evolving volcano situation going through its various stages of maturity. Planning. Slide, please. With constant updates from UE Seismic, the National Disaster Office of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, NEMO, the National Emergency Management Organization, the CDIMA-CU, had been planning, we all had been planning the possibility of an explosive eruption for months in advance, with the 19 regional participating states. The ODPM, as Trinidad and Tobago's Strategic Disaster Preparedness and Management Office, and the country's focal point or liaison office with SEDIMA, we have been fully engaged in all aspects of this planning. According to the regional plan for disaster response, the CARICOM region is divided into 4 geographical zones: East, West, North, and South. Slide, please. Slide, please. So these 4 zones in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago is in Zone 4, in the southern sub-regional area. We were therefore very aware that once the eruption took place, an outside assistance was required. Trinidad and Tobago, as the lead in the south, would be asked to provide support to the eastern sub-region. Thus, from very early, we were in constant dialogue with our defense force, the nation's regional first responder, about the possibility of them deploying an expeditionary task force to support St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So while Trinidad and Tobago is not in the same zone as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we were quite aware that we were going to be in support to the eastern zone in which St. Vincent and the Grenadines lies. There's also a parallel planning process that occurs in disaster situations, and this we call the bilateral process. This takes place at the strategic level between prime ministers and presidents and ministers of national security. Hence, through these 2 processes, the ODPM was doing its own contingency planning for the eruption. On the day of the explosive eruption, the Minister of National Security, who had been liaising with the ODPM all along, would inform the nation that the Honorable Prime Minister had directed that Trinidad and Tobago would provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that the Ministry of National Security was appointed to lead the national response. Mr. Young's plan would have 2 principal lines of effort as we understood it. Line 1, the deployment of troops to St. Vincent and the Grenadines to provide humanitarian assistance. And line 2, a national disaster relief collection drive for that country. Naturally, the first fell to the Defense Force, while the ODPM was responsible for the second. Having been given this Herculean task, how was the ODPM, a coordinating agency, going to execute this mammoth undertaking with very little of the specific items that St. Vincent and the Grenadines was asking for? The ODPM with no centralized warehouses, no heavy lift helicopters or vehicles, no heavy lift drivers, no vessels. How are we going to do this task? Of course, this was made more difficult during a pandemic with increasing numbers of persons becoming infected. This problem we had solved already 2 years before, and we had a plan. The ODPM's plan. Slide. The ODPM's plan for St. Vincent and the Grenadines, or for that matter, any CARICOM country, was refined following Hurricane Dorian in 2019, when once again Trinidad and Tobago went to the assistance of a neighbor in distress, at that time the Bahamas. Taking lessons learned from that operation and thinking if something similar should happen here at home, last year the ODPM conducted a series of national level blended disaster simulation exercises in the event that Trinidad and Tobago was struck by a catastrophic hurricane. These all-of-society approaches to exercising involve representatives from the public and private sectors, civil society organizations, and international organizations and agencies represented by the UNDP and the US Embassy. The exercises bore massive dividends that would redound to the benefit of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as they established strategic relationships and critical linkages that were to be further developed over the past year. Through these exercises, over 50 agencies and organizations identified for their ability to assist in national disaster response and relief participated either in person or virtually. The final exercise in the series simulated a Category 5 hurricane impacting Trinidad and Tobago and challenged attendees to critically consider how they would support the national effort to provide relief to displaced persons both in Trinidad and Tobago while ensuring the safety of their staff given the health concerns posed by COVID-19. This first-time initiative provided a platform for a more integrated approach to strengthening relationships and actions, which ultimately could lead to faster and more structured delivery of disaster relief to our affected citizens and vulnerable populations. Hence, despite the fact that we did not have everything, when the ODPM was given the mandate by the Minister of National Security for the National Disaster Relief Collection Drive, we already had visualized a plan with 4 phases, and each phase would include our national stakeholder network. These phases were information management, establishment of collection centers, land movement of relief supplies to centralized hubs, and sea movement to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The operation. Information management. Critical to success in this operation was information, and therefore our first objective was information management, obtaining the latest information and sharing this promptly with our stakeholders. Slide, please. In this regard, one of the priority information requirements in any disaster relief support operation is obtaining the critical needs list from the affected country in a timely manner. Slide, please. This is always a challenge, and understandably, but it is a critical element to avoid unsolicited items reaching a country and causing an additional burden on that country in the midst of dealing with their disaster situation. A second priority information requirement is communicating with our stakeholder network. This was easy for, as I indicated previously, we had trained together in 2020 and continued to develop the relationship over time. The biggest challenge, however, would be reaching and maintaining the public's interest in providing support to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, especially at a time of economic difficulty in the country due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Minister of National Security, having laid the foundation through his national appeal, the ODPM's Public Information, Education, and Community Outreach Unit, we affectionately call them PICO, began collaborating with the Ministry of National Security Corporate Communications Unit and the Office of the Prime Minister Communications. These units continuously kept the public informed about the coordinated response and relief efforts taking place throughout the country, sharing critical information in a series of press releases carried on websites and social media platforms, also ensuring that the CEO went on television, TTT in fact, and spoke about the issue. Phase 2, the establishment of collection centers. Phase 2, which was conducted simultaneously with Phase 1, saw the ODPM communicating with its traditional partners who can always be counted on to assist with disaster relief, in particular warehousing. Our first port of call is always to the disaster management units. And these are the regional corporations under the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, and TEMA, the Tobago Emergency Management Agency. The DMUs within the 14 regional corporations have spaces that allow them to be used as collection centers, and with TEMA in Tobago, 15 spaces immediately became available. In addition to these collection centers, the ODPM can always count on space being provided by ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, FEEL, the Foundation for the Enhancement and Enrichment of Life, and UNICOMA, which we more popularly know as COURTS. Also coming on board on this occasion was the President's Award Scheme, which offered its premises in Curepe to be used as a center for collecting relief items. Hence, throughout Trinidad and Tobago, we had 18 collection centers that the public and organizations could drop off relief supplies. More details of these arrangements will be provided by later speakers today and tomorrow. However, I must mention the role of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, which was very instrumental in soliciting donations of goods and services from the private sector. And Minister Young would have alluded to Minister Gopi Skoon coming on air tomorrow to share her story with us. Phase 3, the land movement to centralized hubs. Due to the overwhelming support from the public, it was not long before these collection centers began to become filled beyond their capacity. To solve this challenge, the ODPM initiated its temporary warehousing contingency plan, which it had developed with the Port of Port of Spain the year before. Approval was granted by the Port of Port of Spain for us to utilize Shed 3 for additional storage. Sorting and packing of items took place there. However, transportation would now be needed to move these donated items from the collection centers throughout Trinidad and Tobago to the Port of Port of Spain. Here once again, our disaster simulation training in 2020 bore fruit. As was planned, support was provided by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, and the private sector, Ramps Logistics, and the Laying Group. So Phase 4 The sea movement to St. Vincent and the Grenadines was easy because we had support. The ODPM did not need to have vessels. But given the capabilities that lie in Trinidad and Tobago, what we needed to do was coordinate these capabilities. So to facilitate the sea movement to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Defense Force was once again very instrumental, and with support from the port stevedores, provided the logistical support to ensure that all of the items were properly prepared, not only for transportation via the vessel, but for receipt and ease of movement after the arrival in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. In addition to this, the assistance of the National Infrastructure Development Company Limited and the Inter-Island Transportation Company Limited ensured the galleon's passage was able to safely transport this much needed humanitarian aid to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as to take 50 members of the Defense Force to directly support disaster response operations. And Brigadier General Francis just spoke to that. In total, 260 tons of supplies arrived in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on April the 13th, 2021. The ODPM also facilitated the shipping of items later that week through various avenues, utilizing an MOU that CDMA has with Tropical Shipping. One full 40-foot container was dispatched on the 15th of April. In a similar fashion, aid was provided by the Energy Chamber to transport bulk water using water barges, which are usually used to support the offshore energy platforms. Dr. Driver, the CEO of the Energy Chamber, will be here tomorrow to speak about that operation. A second sailing of the galleon's passage took place on Wednesday, the 20th of April 2021. On this occasion, 335 metric tons of relief supplies were again shipped to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, bringing the grand total to almost 600 metric tons. Termination of the operation. On Friday, the 7th of May 2021, the Minister of National Security, the Honorable Fitzgerald Hines, officially brought to a close the National Collection Drive that was launched by Minister Young. This does not mean the work has ended for the ODPM. In fact, we are still working with stakeholders to ship the remaining relief items to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Due to the spike in COVID-19 positive cases, the number of our stakeholders have curtailed their operations, and the ODPM is doing its part to reduce person-to-person contact. In conclusion, while today is about all-board logistics, it also is of importance because it describes in reverse a model for relief supplies coming into Trinidad and Tobago. God forbid, should we have a disaster to deal with. Today, what I have communicated to you is a plan that was very successful, but successful because of the integrated approach of all of Trinidad and Tobago, what we call an all-of-society approach to disaster preparedness and management. I thank you.
Thank you, Major General Rodney Smart, for that detailed account and we'll be here whole afternoon. Right? So I now move over to Mr. Jerry David, the Senior Disaster Management Coordinator, Ministry of Local Government, who will give us his account this afternoon. Mr. David.
Good afternoon, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm happy to be here to recall an event that the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government was very happy to be a part of. When I got the request from the CEO of the ODPM, well, my channel was I had to speak to my PS and then to my minister. And my minister was very, very happy to be a part of this. He actually issued a media release saying that all the 14 municipal corporations, the DMUs, will be used as collection points. The process was easy, simple, because we are used in the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, the disaster management units particularly, in collecting items, because we have been faced with situations like this before, particularly in 2018, when we had to deal with quite a bit of hydrometeorological activities. So what we did is we had a virtual meeting with all the disaster coordinators, and we discussed how we're going to approach it. And we decided to use an incident management system, best practice, ICS, in the incident command system. So we looked at how we're going to deal with the operations part of it, how we're going to deal with the logistics part of it. And then we talked about COVID-19 compliance, because, you know, we are in a pandemic. So how we receive the items from the public was very critical to us. I mean, sometimes we pitched tents outside of the disaster management offices. We pitched these tents and we allowed people to deliver their items there. But, you know, accountability is important. So we had to give delivery notes. So we found a way of just copying their ID cards, taking a pic of their ID cards, so that we could avoid any type of close contact, because that is important for DMU personnel. And then we had to talk about the storage of items if we were overwhelmed, because we have faced this before, where we did not have enough space, ground space, floor space, to handle the amount of items that were being brought to the corporations. So of course, we had a contingency plan for that. We said that we will look at all the community centers, because they were not being used at the time because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in some cases, we made arrangement with the custodians of the community centers, whom we have a very close relationship with, because of course, many of them are part of our shelter management team. So we have access to those areas just in case. And we had to use the community centers just in one instance. And then we appointed the disaster coordinator for Kuba Tabaki Talparo, Mr. Andy Gocharan, as our operations section chief. And then we looked at the logistic part of it, both north and south. We had two other coordinators, Ms. Hazan Cummings from Point Fortin and Ms. Kathy Christopher from the Martin Regional Corporation. So they were handling the logistics part of it. You would appreciate that we are getting items in very small numbers. You know, it's not like, and we got items in very large numbers also. So we are managing space now, because sometimes we would get like 200 cases of water, and then we would get like 12 water tanks, 1,000-gallon water tanks, and we have to store it until the ODPM informs us that they are ready to transport these items to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So a daily count had to be done. So that brought in another section of our incident management system, the admin part of it. And we had to account daily for all the items. And this was critical to us, accountability, so that when we were handing over to the ODPM, it was not very difficult for us. All we needed was for them to give us the format that they wanted it in, the format necessary for them to do their collection at the port. So all of this was done, and on one day, the ODPM had called us and told us that they were making a day available where we can have all these items delivered to the port facility. Mr. Golcharan and our two logistics persons coordinated and brought all the equipment. We on that day, we estimated that we had about 25 trucks on the road. We're talking about Hiabs and 3 tons and 6 tons. We had a lot of vehicles on the road, and we were managing all of this and taking it to the facility where the ODPM could now ship it to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It was joyous to us here to be helping another island. We know how hard it was for those folks in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but we were happy to be able to be a part of this exercise. The ministry was also able to, through the different regional corporations, we actually assisted the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. We were able to give them 2 portable tents with all the equipment needed. That was part of our efforts also. But the public of Trinidad and Tobago must be thanked for all that they have provided to the people of St. Vincent. And people gave in small quantities. We would see in packages just two tins of canned foods. And like the Bible speaks about the widow's mite, they didn't give of their increase. They give as little as they had. And I'm happy and proud of Trinidadians for what we have done, and Tobagonians, of course. And I'm sorry about that. Trinidadians and Tobagonians for all that we have done to the many islands that we have helped, and we were happy again to help another very close island to us, our brothers, the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I want to say thank you to the people of Trinidad and Tobago for all that they did in this effort to assist a neighbor in distress. God bless you, Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. David, for your enlightening talk this afternoon. We want to encourage the viewing public to send comments to TTT Live online. Leave your comments in the comment section, and we'll be able to pick it up from there. So now move over to Mr. Alan Stewart, the CEO of TEMA, to address you. Mr. Stewart.
Good afternoon, all of Trinidad and Tobago. It's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Certainly, this is an occasion that we are very pleased to be a part of. We would have had a number of issues. I reckon technical issues, but I hope that you all are hearing me. Could we just verify that you're hearing? Certainly, the process that we were involved in allowed for a type of demonstration of goodwill across the entire region. We were very pleased that we were able to provide the type of support to this cause, because it was one that required what I described with one word, a level of love and benignity. Certainly, this demonstrated the goodwill of not just the people of Trinidad and Tobago, but the entire region. And as I normally summarize it by saying, we were very pleased to be a part of One Caribbean Strong. This is what I saw coming out of the entire event. Ladies and gentlemen, it was the 9th of April. I got a call from General Smart indicating that the ambition of making donations and having reliefs sent to St. Vincent and wanted us to join this very huge theater. It was our pleasure to be a part of it. For those of you in the Caribbean and those of you who are hearing this broadcast will understand that St. Vincent are brothers. We understand their culture, we understand well in Trinidad and Tobago, their rhythm and that strong feeling. Most of us here in the Caribbean do have relatives and offsprings from the St. Vincent or many parts of the Caribbean. So it was very, very an ambitious task, but what we saw was amazing, the amount of love being demonstrated by the general public. It's important for me to, in doing so, to share with you what I consider to be how we went about this role. We were able to look very, very clinically at what we want to do in sharing information. In sharing the information, we were able to provide the team with the necessaries. So in doing so, I wanted to share with you the entire process because it required a particular type of activity. One, I would want to give you, I would have stated the background as to how this began with a telephone call from the General Smart of the ODPM. It went on to be one that required the public involvement, and therefore public awareness of what was happening in St. Vincent was very, very important. It required shipping, it required data collection, and a number of different tasks to allow this process to be one that was not only transparent, but it allowed for accountability, freight management, and the status of the freight going forward, and also the importance of doing things in a manner that the public will have an understanding. So the public awareness effort began working for us in that through social media campaign, we were able to reach many people who got involved. And these people represent NGOs, PBOs, different quarters of the Tobago House of Assembly, and also the general public, the churches. They were very magnanimous in their offerings. It involved interviews with various media houses, allowing for the message to be expressed and to solicit this type of assistance and calling on the general public for them to get involved in this tremendous effort. Resulting tremendous support from the general public was one that I will always remember, and certainly it went quite well. These are some of the ads we would have used, a number of digital platforms to get the message out, working along with the teams to have interviews, making ourselves available at the different quarters. The logistics behind the scenes was quite remarkable. So I remember the very first morning, it was a Monday morning, the telephone call came in on Friday afternoon around 5:41, somewhere about, from General Smart. and then there was discussions with the chief administrator. I even had some conversation with the chief secretary to receive their blessings going forward. But the Monday morning was very, following an interview on our local television station here in Tobago, I was very nervous when I see how is this thing going to get started, you know, in terms of people coming out and delivering donations. But the process was very magical in the sense that the needs list made itself available, which speaks to what the people of St. Vincent will need of. Water, non-perishable items, water tanks, generators, hygiene products, PPEs, toiletries, and these things played a very important role in these few persons' lives in the very first following 72 hours of the eruption, and therefore it was critical that unsolicited items was not mingled among the things that we wanted to send to St. Vincent. And it was important for us to follow the script, understanding that Trinidad and Tobago was entering into a huge theater space. And in that theater, one of the major players was, or the major player there was Cinema. And through the direction of Neighbour, providing us with the script as to what they wanted, to me that was critical. And I want to commend, I said it already, that I think that they did an excellent job and is still doing in terms of within that first period to get the needs list of the rest of the region. So in joining that huge theater, it allowed for the movement of getting at least 7 pallets down to Trinidad by the 12th of April. And I think we would have shocked my colleague at OPM, you know, he lamented, you know, that the ability for us to muster these pallets up as quickly as possible on the 12th of April to, we were trying to get the Galleon passage, along with working with the cargo staff to catch the cargo star the night before and catch the Galleon passage on the morning. But these developments took place, so we saw 7 pallets being shipped in, and then another 6 pallets on the 26th, and on the 27th we sent another pallets consist of water tanks, and to me that was tremendous. To date, we still have a collection of over 33 plus pallets that we moved in a particular manner, and to me that speaks volumes. To give you an oversight, these, if you were to summarize it, came up to about 22 tons. Let me say that again, 22 tons of items, of tonnage of goods coming out of Tobago during that short period that started around the 9th of April and ended around the 30th of April. It had a dollar value of over, or have a dollar value of over $310,000, $131.60, and it consists of over 5,375 items that will solicit from the public. Now, I must lament, ladies and gentlemen, that there is an expectation that needs to be managed. As I would have indicated that unsolicited items will not to be a part of this operations. And therefore, we had to ensure that we were adhering to the guidelines set out through SEMA and the ODPM considering. So freight status management was one of the important elements to know exactly where goods are located. I want to thank my team, you know, the planning team, the ICT group, for they were able to provide the necessary software that will allow us to track these freight to know exactly where persons and where the goods were located. I want to thank the ODPM and their operations team, along with their logistics team, because supply management is always a huge task, especially when you're doing between countries such as ours that are surrounded by water. and the whole expectation to move items under these conditions definitely is one that is very challenging. So that in general is our story as it relates to the movement of these items. And I really want to thank those of you who played a role. Maybe I will use this platform to really thank the NGOs. And these are largely made up out of faith-based organizations, ADRA, the Red Cross Society, REACT, and a number of various players, PBOs from the private sector, Radio Tamron, and these news houses that made themselves available and presented themselves to provide the type of assistance that this task really required. It was one that you will agree with me that it requires hands and deck. I always make reference to lifting loads that require more than 2 hands. And therefore, to see these many hands coming together, the churches, the members of the different divisions within the Tobago House of Assembly, the support from the executive of the Tobago House of Assembly coming forward and providing the support for us to allow for this to happen. The logistics of travel, getting the goods to Trinidad was quite a challenge. I remember the first shipment, while we got the boat clear, to get onto the ferry was a major challenge, and therefore it speaks to good relations. And these relations, somebody said recently, come about as a result of exchange of call cards before the event. To me, that is very important. So I want to thank you all very much for allowing me to share our experience, and I look forward for us continuing this work, and going forward, I wish the people of St. Vincent God's blessings. Thank you.
Mr. Stewart, that's all the time we have this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, but I want to encourage you to send in your questions and comments to TTT Live Online. Leave it in the comment section, and we'll answer those tomorrow. Right? We're here tomorrow again at 1:30 p.m. live on TTT with the second part of our presentation. Thank you very much. Have a blessed evening, Trinidad and Tobago.